are at the Biblical Village at Yad Shmona. The wine press is here to illustrate the way that olive oil was produced back in biblical times. You know, one of the hardest things for us to deal with is the presence of pain and suffering in our lives. We ask the question of, why does a good God allow things to happen in our lives that cause us pain and suffering? If He is good, why is He not delivering me from this situation? I think that the way things are laid out in Scripture are there to help us illustrate that God knows that we live in a broken world and that pain and suffering are part of our experience, no matter what we do to insulate ourselves from it. I think the illustration of the olive oil is very important because in Exodus 27, Moses tells the children of Israel, "You shall command the children of Israel that they will bring to you pure olive oil, pressed olives for the light and that is caused to burn continually, and in the tabernacle of meeting." Now, in order to get pure olive oil, you'd have had to gone through the whole process, and the fact that it comes from the people and not the responsibility of the priesthood gives the people a real material witness as to how that light is produced in the temple. So the olives, which are obviously grown on trees, the first part of the process is to take burlap sacks, put them around the tree, and then just beat the branches of that tree. Take long sticks until all those olives just fall off. Now that sounds like the illustration of a painful process, at least for the tree. But then once the olives are collected and they're put here into this trough, this large stone is rolled over them in order to make them crack, because without the crack, you can't squeeze olive oil out of them. So once the olives are put in here and cracked, again, you have another illustration of another seemingly painful part of a process. But again, it's just part of a process that's leading to a destination. And it's the same process that God's involved in our lives as well. So after going through the beating process and the crushing process, you have olives that are cracked. So those olives are then put into these sacks, which act as a strainer, and they're put exactly at the leverage point where large rocks are raised up, which causes all of this to be squeezed. A lot of pressure is put on these olives, and it's that pressure that squeezes out what's inside after the cracking and produces the oil, which runs down into this trough and is collected later on. So for the children of Israel to be able to go through this process, and then after all of this to bring to the temple as part of their sacrifice the oil is what is the fuel for the lamp that's inside the temple. In other words, where God comes to dwell among His people, there is a requirement for light. And the fuel for that light is actually the process of suffering that each one of us goes through. So my encouragement to you is that if you're in a place where God has taken you either through a time of where you feel like you're being beaten, or if you feel like you're being crushed or even squeezed, it's all part of God's plan of eventually squeezing something out of you that produces light in the place where He comes to dwell with you. So don't be discouraged at the painful times that we go through. We all go through them. We all have seasons of pain and suffering. But I want to encourage you to keep going and allow God to finish that process, because that's where actually you find your fellowship and intimacy with Him at the end.